Hey, it's Nathan. I just watched the new Paranormal Activity play over at the Amundsen Theater in Los Angeles, and I want to talk about it. I don't see a lot of theater even attempting horror these days, which is kind of weird because, the health and relevance of the theater has never been more frail. You would think they would be frequently reaching out with trembling, starving hands towards such a populist genre. But the only really major recent examples I can think of, and I am being generous with the term recent, are all musicals. Rocky Horror Picture Show, Little Shop of Horrors, Evil Dead the musical shows which kind of make the horror feel like a big bloody party rather than something that is earnestly trying to disturb. So, I was curious to see what a paranormal activity non musical stage play would even look like. Especially given that the movie it's based on is so tied to the conventions of filmmaking. To the uninitiated, Paranormal Activity is a 2007 micro budget indie turned multi million dollar Hollywood franchise, which is chiefly about various people filming their haunted houses each night. Every time it gets dark and the characters go to sleep, the audience is abandoned basically in these silent homes where an invisible demon does as it pleases, gradually becoming more threatening each progressing night. And there's this brilliant tension between the humans who seem to think they're asserting some kind of control over the demons by recording them, and the actual experience of watching the footage, which really only reveals how completely powerless they actually are. So, how do you take a franchise whose core identity is so tied to the lens of a camera and adapt it to the stage? Well, when the curtain rose at the beginning of the first act, I thought, wow, there's my answer. They really did it. The interior of a two-story house takes up the entire stage. The bottom floor is one big giant room with the living room and the kitchen, and then there's a staircase that goes up to the second floor, which has a bedroom and a bathroom and a hallway, which has this door leading up stage into this deeper room that the audience can't quite see, which is what I kind of call the spooky door. A lot of the scary stuff happens there. So, essentially, we get this bird's eye view of the entire house, right? Or, I don't know, wall eye view. And the house is carved into these four separate boxes, basically. And I think what's so brilliant about this set design is it allows the audience's eye to travel all up and down the house for potential threats, especially in quiet moments. We search the set for spooky happenings in the same way that we search the screen in the movies. And the immensity of the house dwarfs the actors. Lights might be on in a room where they are, but darkness always surrounds them in all the vacant ones. The idea is so great. So it's such a shame that whoever actually built this set deserves to be in jail. We sat in the balcony for the first act, and the floor and ceiling barrier between the first and second floor, it basically cut off the first, the upper half of the first floor, from our vantage point, which was mostly fine. We could see mostly everything, but there was this moment where there's a big loud scare, and then after that the husband gets home and the wife is gibbering about this terrifying thing she saw on the wall mounted TV, and we were like, what wall mounted TV? we couldn't see it. And so I had spied some empty seats in the second row, way up front. So when intermission came around, I was like, let's go. We ran down there, sat down. Nobody busted us or anything. And so, then I kind of leaned back. I'm, feeling pretty clever until the curtain rises again. And I realize, oh no. Now that same barrier is completely cutting off the entire second floor. And I could hear like people next to me like grumbling, like, can't see anything, can't see anything, because you really couldn't. Like these seats were worse than the nosebleed bleed seats. These seats that were probably like $200 or something compared to my $40 ones, which also could not see everything. I'm shameless enough that I didn't care to just stand up in the middle of the scene and find something better farther back, but even the better seat that I did find, like I had to crane my neck to see like part of the spooky door because now the wall was kind of cutting off the hallway. Just like I truly cannot believe the Amundsen had the balls to charge people as much as they did, or even just to allow a set like that to be built that where only like half of the seats could actually see everything important happening on the stage. I mean, I understand it was like a touring production, but at a certain point you need to like warn your patrons if they're buying a seat that isn't going to be able to see everything. It's pretty messed up. It seems to me that these problems could have easily been avoided by simply building a shallower second floor whose depth stopped further upstage than the edge of the first. I worked as a set carpenter one summer, and everyone hated me because I was that terrible at carpentry, and even I can see that. Anyway, the actual content of the play, insofar as I was able to see it, was pretty good. I wonder if this play wasn't written originally as a ghost story that was just like kind of its own standalone thing, and then had the Paranormal Activity brand grafted onto it later in the revision process. The focus of the movies is atmosphere, an invisible dread that comes to grow so heavy that it begins to feel more real than the actual physical world. The key to these films is silence, and the scares slowly and often subtly reveal themselves cloaked within that silence. The slight creak of a door opening by itself can feel so monumental within that soundscape. By the end, these brief sounds interrupting the quiet have become a persistent background noise, each sound a testament to the demon's dominance over that silence and the normal world it represents. Something to be basically ignored at a certain point so that you can be on guard for whatever new escalation is sure to follow. Half of the play's scares are jump scares. The fire alarm goes off. Spooky faces scream and roar. Rather than allowing the dread to slowly and steadily thicken, most scenes will begin from a place of safety and build to some loud, hysterical screech before resetting for the next scene. It feels more indebted to like Poltergeist. There's even a ghost hunter who shows up at one point to talk to the monster with some gizmo. I began to feel like the play's primary goal was in proving that the stage can provide the same scares that movies can, rather than finding new scares that only the stage can provide. The reason for this seems to be a misguided desire to foreground the drama between the two actors who are the leads, the husband and wife who live in the house. There's this cliche conflict of, she sees the ghost, but he doesn't believe her. So she gets mad at him, and then he sees it, and she gets mad because it took him so long to believe it. And, the dialogue is, wonderfully naturalistic, and their dynamics are charmingly realized, but there are just no surprises here. If you've seen any ghost story, you've probably seen this one. It just feels like the writers were ashamed to make something that is pure horror. They had to elevate it with themes of mental health and tragic backstories. And, maybe they did in order to get produced at a big old theater like, the Amundsen and all the other big places it's been touring. Maybe the reason that the theater doesn't embrace horror more often is because these gatekeepers look down on it. I don't know, but that's the impression I got from watching this script, and it's sort of insistence on like embracing character at the expense of horror. But maybe this is more a economic reflection of the probable reality that the average theater goer is not much of a horror person. I thought the LA Times review by Charles McNulty was really interesting, where he starts it by saying like he's not much of a theater person. He hasn't really watched horror ever since he got scared of it as a little kid. And then he proceeded to just gush and gush and gush about how much he loves this play, and all the things he's gushing about are just like things any horror person has seen 1,000 times, maybe admittedly in a stage play format, but it just, I recognize it as something I see all the time when I sit non-horror people down to watch horror. They realize like how much fun horror can be. And even that review at the end concludes with the sentence that I thought was so like kind of damning, that even in the midst of this he could identify that like it's the quote was something like, it's more mathematically impressive than poetically impressive. And I kind of agree with that. There's the play Paranormal Activity, the play is extremely competent in pretty much every way. It's hard to really hate anything about it, assuming you can see all of it. It's just that it's good enough that I feel like I often get glimpses of how it could have been great. The moments I will remember the most are actually the times when it did allow itself to quiet down, when the couple is like creeping down the stairway with like their phone flashlight, and the shadows from the stair banisters are like swooping across the stage. The beginning of the last scene when the house is a mess and the couple is sitting in blank despair. Okay, that was the end of the spoiler-free section. But before I go, I just have to talk about the absolute coolest thing I saw in this play. Like, it's the most fun thing I've seen on stage all year, maybe in many years. But admittedly, I haven't been to the theater as much. But anyway, this had the whole theater losing their minds. And I want to emphasize that if you think you might see this play, and if you can, if it's coming near you, you really should check it out. Like, if you're curious at all, again, it's good. I don't know if my review really like communicated that, but it's a good time. It's just not like an amazing time. Anyway, I'm gonna ruin the best scene now. So here's what happens. Hubby and wifey have this big fight, and she goes upstairs into the spooky door to like cool off, and the husband's down in the downstairs like, I didn't handle that very well, and so he goes over to the kitchen. He starts like making some food. I think he's hoping that's going to cheer her up. The wife emerges from the spooky door wearing this new robe, like this kind of, she's gotten comfortable, a big cozy looking robe that kind of is real baggy, and she's got the hood up. She goes downstairs, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, babe." And she's like, yeah, kind of monosyllabic, not super responsive, but that's not unusual for her at this point in the play. She grabs like a knife and some peppers and starts chopping, but she's got her back, she's chopping kind of like this, back. And so she's doing that as the husband is talking, walking around, and our attention is on him as he talks. And then spooky door opens in the second floor again. It's the wife in the same robe. And she goes, "Honey, who are you talking to?" And then you look down, and the person-shaped robe just goes flat. What? So, that's like obviously impressive just from like a magic trick point of view. Like, how the hell did they do that? How do they, how they get the actress out of the robe without the robe collapsing until the moment they wanted it to collapse? I don't know. It blows my mind. But someone tell me if you think you've got it figured out. But the reason I wanted to end on this note is because I think that scare is such a great example of like a scare that really only works on stage, or at least only works as well as it does on stage. Because what's so great about that, obviously, is like the way you're looking from the guy, then you look up to the wife up here, realize that's not what you're supposed. What that's she's not supposed to be up there. You look down there, and the second you look down, she collapses. It plays with the conventions of how the audience member interacts with a theater space compared to putting things in like loud noises or whatever that, like, we've all seen a million times in the movies. That kind of thing is like that robe trick. That's the kind of thing that I was really hoping to see more of. And there's surprisingly, like, with this brilliant set that seemed to promise like so many cool like situations where like multiple things are happening in different rooms at the same time and you're being guided all over the house. That really doesn't happen a whole lot. And that's what I was really hoping to see when the curtain rose on that wonderful set at the beginning of the play. See you next time. Support my work on Patreon. Support my work on Patreon. Support my work on Patreon. Oh boy.